Welcome back, everyone. Once again, I'm Kristen from Forthright. Today, we're going to pick up the conversation from July 11th, where we left off answering your questions from our cyber series on cyber hygiene. This is a pre-recorded discussion, but you can still ask questions during this webinar. We'll email you directly the answers from our panelists. Okay, Rory, let's continue where we left off.
I think this ties into what we were just talking about. I'm gonna throw this one towards Tim. I think I think maybe this is high level. This is kind of a simple answer, but somebody asked, hey, why is it important to have a clear process for reporting and responding to security incidents?
That's a
And
good
I,
question.
I think at some level it goes, oh well, it must be important, but I think this was kind of a generalized question because I think a lot of folks don't have a formal process in place, right? My process is I'm just going to call Heath, right? But if I'm if I'm an organization, there's a lot to it.
That's a good question, Roy. I think at a high level, and not at an IT, but at a personal level, we all could be impacted by I don't want to say disasters, but it could be a fire, it could be a storm, right? Whether it's a hurricane or a tornado or something like that. We all tend to react to those. We got hit by a large hailstorm a few years back, and if you're not prepared, and if you don't know how to react when that situation hits, you may not take the best actions to protect your property or your lives or the people you care about. Moving it deeper into technology, the same thing still applies. Only now it's more complicated. Um, I can only imagine what Frank has seen and Heath has seen in terms of technology over the years. Uh, think about all the different think about everything that all the different types of data that we have. Uh, if we don't have all of that tracked ahead of time, if we don't have inventories where we know exactly what all systems we have, where all of our data is, how everything talks to each other, then how do we begin to shut things down when that worst case hits? How do we know what systems to begin to recover? How do we know what's critical? Years ago, I built a business continuity plan for a large retail company, and we had to sit down. We call it our business impact analysis, right? Our BIA. Had to sit down with the executives in the company just to decide what the priorities were. This goes. I'm aging myself. This is back to the point where we still had to debate how important email was, and that's when the business owner said, you know what, this has become a vital part of how we do business day to day. And then you start to think about your business, whatever that business is, and you go to your operational systems and you say those have to be key. But I'd argue that maybe payroll may be one of the most important things you've got, because if you get hit, if you get popped, it can take days to weeks to recover, and you want your employees to stay whole. You want your employees to stay invested. You want your employees to come back to work every day. So the point is, if it's not just enough to build out these plans, uh, because at the end of the day, when the crisis hits, the plan is meaningless if you haven't trained through it. What you want is people to stay calm in the middle of chaos, because it will be chaos. You'll be worried about the survival of your business. You'll be worried about the impact on your customers, your clients, your employees. It's the worst of times. So that's when we need training to kick in. And I don't know if that's answering the question exactly as intended, but it really comes down to being able to respond more instinctively. And I don't, to Frank's point earlier, I don't mean we have to beat this into everybody on a weekly basis, but you need to go through exercises. You need to go through frequent training, whether it's quarterly, whether it's annually, whether it's every 6 months. You need to be to the point where everybody knows what their responsibilities are, what our assets are, what our top priorities are, and where to go from there.
Tim, I always like to find a household analogy that works when we're talking about anything, because I just find that in technology we find any possible excuse to create a fictitious world that doesn't exist and it's super unique and this, that, and the other. So the example you were just giving, to me, it really comes down to, like, I think about your personal finances, right? You have an idea of how many subscriptions you have, what assets you have, I hope, and you start working through that, and you understand, I have money coming in, I have money coming out. And while you don't necessarily know every single penny that comes in and out per se, at least not at the moment that it happens, but you can reconcile at some point in time, hopefully on a more than regular basis than once a year when your taxes show up, to do that. But the point that I'm trying to make is that, this is an example of what you're getting at. Like, do you know what you have? Like, if you were hit today, do you know your credit cards that you currently have? Do you know how to reach out to those credit card companies? Do you know how to reach out to your bank? Do you have a 401k? Whatever those things are, do you have those means in there? Translate that to business. Oftentimes we don't know all the devices that are there. We don't have an understanding of all the applications. And then now with the world of SaaS ahead of us, that creates a whole new, people are like, well, that's my SaaS provider, so I don't have to really worry about it. And I was like, well, sure, I guess. I guess you could make that analogy, like your CPA, just pass it on to your CPA. That's their problem. And then they go, but it's your money, so you should probably be involved in that decision-making process. And I think, like, that's one of those areas where I see this often. Heath and I were recently involved in something, and we had put together an application inventory for a client. This is not a very large, firm, but they have somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,600 apps across the firm. And they're like, that's impossible. Okay, but this is what it is. And you start realizing very quickly how maybe some of the lax nature of how we run operations, not us specifically, but how people operate, that they have these lax practices because they don't connect those dots. But I think the way you just described it really points out that, like, hey, something's going to happen, like your house or something like that in a natural disaster. You know what you need to do. You contact your insurance company. You talk to your all the different things are in the row. Now do that across 1,500 applications. Do that across hundreds and hundreds of devices. Oh, don't forget your SaaS providers while you're at it. Oh, and then every one of your employees. Yeah, what are their information? Because you got to worry about that too now. So, like, that's the responsibility of the organization. To keep that entity moving.
Yeah, and having those clear processes defined, knowing what you've got to report on, knowing what you're trying to secure. Early on in the series, I talked about asset management. You can't secure what you don't know you have, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you don't know you will have that, when we talked to them and said, "Oh, you got 1,500 applications," they're like, "No, we don't." A lot of those were SaaS applications, right?
Yeah.
So they don't even know where that data exists nowadays. The other side to this is, the reporting side of it is, hopefully everyone, at least here in the U.S., it's different areas in different countries. But if your house is burned to the ground, to call 911. If your data is burning to the ground, who do you call?
Yeah.
Right? Oops, I did click on that link. Oh my gosh, my computer's running things. I see emails being sent I didn't send. Who do I call? Right? Making people aware of that process and then once that ticket comes into, because they're going to call the service desk, right? Once that ticket comes in, hopefully, what does the service desk do with it? How do they escalate it? Where does it go to? Those all need to become, I use this term a lot in talking with people from an operational point of view, that needs to become muscle memory, right?
Yeah.
You go play golf and you go to tee off. If you're good at doing that, it's because you've got muscle memory. It's because you've practiced doing that. Or you're just incredibly lucky, one of the two. I'm usually just incredibly lucky. But you should have muscle memory at it. And it should be something that you know how to do without a whole lot of thought. To your point, Tim, staying calm in the face of adversity, right?
But to your point, Heath, to get that muscle memory, and I'll just tell a quick story. Roy, I'll try not to take up too much time, but we were doing a tabletop exercise for a client. And for the people watching, if you're not familiar with the tabletop exercise, it's about the lightest lift, the least invasive type of exercise you can do to test your plan, right? You've written your plan, you've done your research, you've got a good idea of what you've got. you need some sort of way to test it. Obviously, the most invasive would just be to shut something off and see what happens, but that's not so good for your end clients. So tabletop exercises are generally what we recommend, and what I've participated in the most over the last 5 to 10 years. In this case, I remember this is a large tech firm. I say large, 200, 300 people, which I think is pretty big for a group that's focused on tech, heavily reliant on one of the world's largest cloud providers. And when we started going through the worst case scenarios, they didn't have an answer except we'll just call our provider and see if they can restore everything. There wasn't any adequate backup system in place. There wasn't any controls that would have prevented this. And they just said, well, it's the cloud. They're big. They'll be able to save us, was their answer. And I could see the COO sitting over there with panic in his eyes, realizing that they had not done the research and the level of preparation that they needed to. So in this case, I don't want anybody to get in trouble, but it was very good to go through that tabletop exercise and just double check that everything was in place like it needed to be. I know they improved it after we walked out, and that's what it's all about.
Tim, it's awesome that you were able to do that in a tabletop exercise. Something that is, you have like the wherewithal without actually impacting. I have a similar story, but it wasn't with a tabletop exercise. It involved a provider, and they were compromised, and the provider shut them down. And this brought everything to a halt. And due to automations and other things, they could not restore from backup because all the backups were with said provider in the same place. And they just didn't consider a scenario in which, what happens if the location of our backups, while different region, different geos, all that jazz, but the same control plane, and all of a sudden now what happens there? It was that exercise that actually several years ago, we had changed our own backup policies, where we can use the provider for like what we call quick restores, but from a disaster recovery, it's not an acceptable form of how that works. So anybody watching, if you happen to have one of those cloud providers and you are also using their backup solution, just know that the subscription, the tenant, whatever they call it, is still the same place. So the fact that it's physically located someplace else, just know that doesn't cover you from that.
Boy, that's a really, really good point, right? I mean, a question that comes to my mind, like I'm listening to all this. This is not a question that somebody wrote in, but I have to think someone's asking themselves this question. They've got to go, wait a minute. Can I protect against every scenario, right? The answer is probably going to be no, right? Can you protect against every scenario? And how do you weigh that out? How do you weigh out, well, how do I know that I'm protected? And do you guys recommend doing some sort of risk analysis and saying, well, let's protect against whatever is most likely to happen to you if a bad thing were to come your way? And, how do you know when you have enough protection? I mean, we used to have a slide that showed, like, I don't know, it had to be 1,000 different tech companies, logos all shoved into one slide. We used to put it up and go, this is what the cybersecurity landscape looks like. And everybody on that sheet was telling everyone, we have the silver bullet. We have the thing that you need to keep you protected. Of course, they were all in different silos, and we all know you need kind of a layered approach. But how do you know that you're adequately protecting yourself? Who wants to take that one?
I can start off with that. I think you all have some good comments off of what I will say. Move to a cabin out in Alaska on a mountain and disconnect from everything. Technologically, I think you'll be fine. There's other risks out there, bears and other predators you might have to be aware of. But years ago, before I actually knew Rory, I was giving a presentation to a very large group of business people here in South Florida. And I was sponsoring the event, and so I got the chance to give a little talk about things. And I like to say, those of you who don't know me, I was into security before security was cool. This was 20 plus years ago now. And I was given a talk about cybersecurity. Believe it or not much has changed, I guess, for me.
Just so you know, I've got some of the silly putty, just so you know.
So the question was that they wanted me to address is, how do we keep ourselves secure in today's changing landscape of the internet's now becoming a thing and all this stuff. And so I put together a little presentation, and the giveaway I had given to everybody was a little blue silly putty egg that had a little piece of blue silly putty in it. So in my presentation, I said, this is one way I can make sure that you stay safe from the online threats. Locate your company's internet connection, remove the cable, and insert this putty in there. Now you'll be safe. Now you'll be safe from everything that's out there, right? Well, in today's day and age, none of those options are really viable, although I am considering the mountaintop cabin in Alaska somewhere. Seems like it would be a lot easier sometimes. The real answer is, the being vigilant and layering all these things that we keep talking about: backup, security awareness training, asset management. This is the whole point of the cyber hygiene series, was to show you these are the things you need to be doing and the layers of things that you need to be doing to do stuff. And you don't have to be doing these at great lengths to start. Just start, right? The problem we see a lot of times is people get overwhelmed and they can't bring themselves to do it. How are we going to accomplish anything? Just start. Go to your finance team. Find out what your assets are. I'm a big fan of doing that because someone paid for them. If someone paid for them, the people who watch the money know what you have. They probably are the only ones who may really know what you have, right? And start putting plans together. Just start working through it. One of the slides I had in the series, on the kind of the outline of the slide, it had written up there, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And this can seem like you're trying to eat several elephants. So just get started. Just do those basic things that we outlined in the series, and start doing all the things that you need to do, so it doesn't become overwhelming to you.
Rory, I want to talk about one I think was. Oh, I'm sorry, Tim. Go for it.
No, go ahead, Frank. Go ahead.
I was going to say that I want to talk about one of the most exciting subjects we could possibly talk about, which is insurance. And I feel like that's one of those areas where those guys have gotten it right. The insurance companies have gotten it right. They always measured risk, and they present it to you in a dollar amount, which is always easy to digest. So like whether it's your auto insurance or homeowners insurance, right? You asked a question that I thought was easily the best question I've heard, which is like, how much is do I have enough? Do I have enough security? Right? It's not like obtain an object and then you have it, right? It doesn't, you have that thing, sure, but you don't necessarily have security because it's all based on risk. So when you think about your home, right? If you have a $100,000 home, but you've insured $2,000, you probably don't have enough coverage, right? You may not be able to afford the $100,000. It's a different problem altogether. But the point there is that if there's an establishment of value. You're establishing the value of whether or not you want to cover that $100,000 home in this example. And then there's other factors like deductibles and this, that, and the other. But if you translate that to how IT is and security is in IT, you're seeing a major shift. Whichever framework that I know Heath covered a couple of them during the series. These frameworks, they've moving their conversations from controls and this to let's talk about risk. Let's make risk the conversation we're having that conversation about, because ultimately it's what kind of risk are you willing to take, right? Tim's earlier analogy about a natural disaster, some people don't have insurance. Some people are totally fine with that. They assume that risk. Maybe that's a life choice, it's a financial choice, whatever that case may be. But ultimately, whether you have enough or not, that's a personal choice that organizations make, and it's all based on how much risk they want to assume and what kind of dollar amount that they want to go to with it. So yeah, that's something I would say. Tim, I didn't want to jump in with you, but go for it.
No, you're good. I think we're gonna sound like an echo chamber here. because I liked the analogy of the well, you didn't say cabin in the woods, but cabin on the mountaintop or whatever. But to your point, Frank, it's a for me, it's risk appetite. Um, because there is no single answer to Rory's question, right? I think we'd all agree on that. There is no single answer. It depends on your risk appetite, because I think even the four of us would disagree personally or professionally how much risk we're willing to take. I'm pretty conservative when it comes to. I'm not big on taking a lot of risk. But I've met a lot of people in my life that are completely happy. Just set that risk. I'll take my chances. I'll live with it. I'll go to Vegas. I'll do whatever. But regardless of where your appetite is, to your point, it can be measured, right? There's a way to say I can live with that risk. I'm not comfortable with that risk. But at the crux of this, at the very heart of this, it's about assessing it. It's about determining what your risks are. From a standpoint of disaster recovery, I mentioned it earlier, we get in and we do that BIA. Talk about what our critical assets are. What are those things that would cripple us from moving forward? What do we have to stay in business? What do we have to keep the doors open, to keep the lights on? And then we begin to walk down that from the highest risk, the most critical asset, down to the lowest in terms of those odds that we're taking or willing to accept. It's not easy. It's not easy. It's time consuming. It's going to take a lot of time from a lot of people. You're going to have to keep it up to date. But at the end of the day, you'll be able to sleep better at night. You'll be able to know whether, Frank, you supplement it. The four risk responses, right? We can mitigate risk. We can put controls in place. I know it's a dirty word, but we can put controls in place to lower our risk. We can transfer risk, like Frank said. We can buy cybersecurity insurance or other forms of insurance to cover us. We can deny it. We can just say we're not going to perform that activity that leads to that risk anymore, or we can accept it. I can live with that. No longer accepting credit cards is not something I can do. I have to take credit cards. We've got controls in place. I can live with that risk. But to your point, Rory, I don't want to say it's an individual question, but it certainly is up to the organization. It's a difficult conversation, but one that the leadership team needs to have.
I heard a really smart person say this, and I wrote it down. And for some reason, I can't keep it in my head. So I have this written literally on a note on my desk. And those of you who know me, I don't do handwritten notes. Everything's got to be electronic.
Is that right next to your password?
But it is. It's right next to your password that I keep on my. It's this. Risk is not an emotion. Risk is a formula. Probability times impact. And most of the time, impact equals dollar signs. So it's really probability times
or indirectly,
money. Yeah. Right? So, but the key thing is that first statement of that. Risk is not an emotion. It's a formula. Probability times impact. And that's the way you have to look at it.
Yeah.
So, hey, let's shift gears here kind of quickly over to something that, I think you guys would get excited about, because it's a little maybe techier than what we've been talking about. But someone asked, they said, hey, Heath, during the series, you mentioned vulnerability management. People always talk about pen testing. How do I know if I need a pen test? What is a vulnerability scan? Are there different kinds of pen tests? Is a pen test always the same thing? Do I need one? Do I need the other? What's the difference? How do we answer that?
If you need a pen test, if you have to ask if you need a pen test, you probably don't need one, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe you need one eventually, but if you're asking what it is,
unless there's a box on an insurance form, like
right now.
Yeah, unless there's a box on an insurance form or something like Frank was talking about that says you have to get a pen test. Really, everything starts with vulnerability management, and vulnerability management starts with vulnerability discovery, or vulnerability scanning, as we like to call it in the industry, right? Going back to that whole asset management thing, and I don't want to take us back down that road, but it just goes hand in hand with that. You can't protect what you don't know you have. You can't protect yourself against vulnerabilities that you don't know you have. And the fact of the matter is, we've been working with several organizations, even the year before I came here, and even now this year being here, working with several organizations that call up and say, I want a pen test, I need a pen test. And the answer is always like, why do you think you need one, right? And then they usually end up doing vulnerability management. You need to discover all your assets, know your assets, scan your assets for vulnerabilities, take care of that first level. First time you do a vulnerability scan, you're going to come back with a ream of paper this thick of everything that you need to do. 99% of them are probably going to be problems with printers, and coffee pots, and staplers that no one ever pays attention to or ever fixes. Just went through it with a CIO with this the other day. And they're like, what do I do with all these? I'm like, well, first you should update all your printers. And then we'll just do another scan because then we don't even bother. They'll just knock out half of this report, right? But you do have to do that. And the whole point of a pen test is to see how well you're doing at managing your vulnerabilities. We've done everything we can discover. We've taken care of all the pieces that need to be updated. We've gotten everything isolated that we can't update. We put them in walled gardens. Now, okay, can someone who's super creative and really understand how the world works get into our systems in spite of the fact that we've updated, we don't have all these vulnerabilities out there now? That said, I'm going to stop off the soapbox and I'll let Frank and Tim add to that one.
I would go a little bit further on that, Heath, and say even I mean, look, what is a vulnerability scan? It's evaluating all of your systems, right? Your physical and virtual systems, to see if they're patched up to speed, to see if there's anything vulnerable out there. Any I don't want to get too deep into the tech, but it could be encryption algorithms, it could be encoding, it could be any number of things, right? We're looking for something that could be exploited by a bad actor, but we're doing it through a system. It's performing, millions of checks. It's going out and looking at all of your equipment. That doesn't mean that vulnerabilities on system A are the same as vulnerabilities on system B. Like you said, it's one of the biggest challenges in vulnerability management is determining what do I need to patch. And I hate to say this, but in some ways it gets back to risk again. Because if system A is sitting out in my DMZ or sitting out in, it's web facing, it's accessible, as opposed to system B, which is behind several layers of firewalls. If I've got, the keys to the kingdom in one or the other, then I'm going to say that, you need to look at the risks according to that and determine what I need to prioritize, what my highest priority should be in terms of patching that. Roy, I think you asked the difference between a vulnerability scan and a penetration test as part of that question. Okay.
Yes.
And I would go in and I would say that vulnerability scan that Heath described eloquently is typically not what we would call invasive, right? I shouldn't break things. I can't promise, but I shouldn't break things. It's more of a passive scan to see what's in place. There are different types of vulnerability scans. I can have that, that clear box where I've got credentials. I can have a black box like I might do from the outside, an external vulnerability scan versus an internal vulnerability scan. But all of this scanning should be fairly innocuous. It shouldn't create problems, as opposed to a pen test where I'm going to see if I can actually get in. I'm going to bang on the door. I'm going to try to kick down the door. I might break things on the way. I might take systems offline. But this really gets back to how we want to test our controls. A vulnerability scan is key to staying safe, but it never answers that question: can the bad guy get in? It says I've taken all the measures that I should. My patching is up to date. I've tried to get rid of all my insecure protocols, all of this, but ultimately I need a human being on the other side who's gonna think a little bit differently than that scanner and see if they can kick the door in and get to that pot of gold.
One of the analogies that I've heard is, the pen test is the final exam, right?
That's good.
That's going to be the test to see if all that you did is working, right? I think I've heard it's the final exam, but don't think of it as a classroom. Think of it as it's the final exam of, kickboxing school, right? So you don't want to show up on your first day and go, I want to take the final exam at kickboxing class, and you haven't had the first class yet, right? Because it's not going to go well. So, when people go, I need a pen test, and, you ask them, well, what have you been doing? tell me about your security program. What kind of vulnerability management do you have in place? The pen tester will go, I don't have to do a pen test. I can already tell you that I can get in because you haven't done all these things, right? You're going to fail the final exam. It's not something you probably, you learned how to do on your own watching YouTube videos. Um, and that kind of leads me to the final question here. And Heath, I know when we were putting the cyber hygiene series together, we said, hey, this is really supposed to be informational. Nobody's selling anything. It's about kind of creating some awareness, and I think you even pointed to some free tools and things that people can go do it on their own. I feel like perhaps we went too far by not being salesy at all. One of the questions that came in was, "Hey, I don't have the expertise or resources to do this. So how am I supposed to get this done? Is this I imagine this is some of what you guys do, and other than just hiring someone or along with hiring someone, how do I know that I'm hiring the right people? Other than you guys have panel discussions, and you all sound like you know what you're talking about. How do I know? How do I know I'm at the right place? How do I go about getting some of this done?
Sure.
We should let Frank answer because
Yeah.
when people come to us looking to get some of this done, they usually start with Frank, and then Frank
Oh,
gets other people engaged.
yes. Roy, I think you were hinting at it. I was going to chime in, but then we had to change topics. Is when you were talking about the pen test as an example, um, there are going to be situations where you're going to be in a tough spot and you have to do that pen test because you're trying to hit this checkbox. I think that to answer your question, this is where the right partner comes into place. If you're gonna go ahead and shift this risk to somebody else, transfer the risk as Tim was getting at, the the partner is going to tell you, hey, look, I know you got to do this, so you're going to go ahead and go through this exercise, but it's going to be ugly. And I think that the right kind of partner is going to tell you that up front and is going to educate you along the way. I think that one of the words I use at Forthright often when I'm discussing any of our services or talking up our staff as to how we operate is it has to be consumable. In other words, whatever we're delivering to someone, you can't just lay it on them this like behemoth where they can't digest it. They can't. It's just way too much information. Heath was talking about that elephant analogy, right? If I just dumped an elephant in front of your house, said, "Here you go, man, enjoy," you don't even know what to do with that. And so, one of the areas I think in choosing the right partner is that they're educating you along the way. They're explaining to you why you need to be doing something. There's that area where yes, it's going to be you could be the skeptic because I usually am and be like, great, you're just trying to sell me more. But if you pay attention, I think you'll find that sometimes it might just be that, or sometimes they're just really trying to help you along the way. And whether that is with that specific partner or not, they're just trying to help you make right decisions. Because I think inevitably, none of us here on this call, we don't work for free, right? All of us on this call, whether on this panel or listening to this, we don't work for free. So therefore, the goods and services we perform are for some fee. So, but if someone were to ask you, haphazardly, hey, what's your thought on whatever? You give them your 2 cents and move a long way. But you don't give them the dollar because that there's a component of that, right? You're trying to sell your services. So I think that's kind of what I'm getting at is when you're picking your partner, you know, um, if they're truly adverse to giving you information, educating you along the way, and it's just really a money grab situation or taking advantage of your situation, yeah, I think that's really unfortunate. That's probably not the right partner. I know that in incident response situations, when customers come up to us about they're in a very vulnerable place, and it's really unfortunate because you're trying to comfort them in what they're a victim, you know, and but you're at the same time you're trying to address a serious situation, and there's a transaction involved that you need to deal with as well. And I think that as long as at the end of the day that partner is doing right by you and you feel good about that, then yeah. So that's one of those areas where I try to make sure that they understand it's not just about the transaction. You're going to build these relationships. That's how you choose the right partner, because that's what it is. It's a partnership. It's not a widget you're buying. It's not a tool, and I transfer the tool to you, and here you go. And if you are, then I'm not sure what kind of value that's being derived there. But I will tell you that Forthright's one of our core competencies, one of our core values, is all about driving highly value propositions to the customer. And so I know anyone could say that everyone's a trusted advisor, everyone provides value. I'm just telling you that that's how we do it here. And I think that's something we communicate on regular, whether it's through situations like this, a one-on-one in a conversation with a customer, during an IR situation, incident response situation, where the customer's in a really vulnerable spot. How are we addressing that customer? How are we making sure that they're informed, making good choices? And listen, sometimes getting to know fast is one of the things I try to tell people often, is like, I don't think we're right for everybody. I don't know that that we have the solutions for every single organization out there. I don't think anyone does, unless maybe you're Microsoft. Then I guess you can have the solution for everybody. But in general, there aren't too many of those out there. But the truth is that there's a right fit. And finding that right fit that makes both parties comfortable, I think, is an important thing. And that's something I try to communicate, regardless of whatever that service is: security, IT operations, our digital transformation stuff. It doesn't matter what it is. All of those things have to be a good fit. So,
Tim, do you have any final words of advice for whoever's might be listening to this?
Well, it's hard to follow up Frank. He's so blasted eloquent. That was very well said. The only thing I would add to what Frank said, and I've talked to clients about this for years, it's not just who the partner is. It's, do you need a partner? Can you hire somebody to do this work, to come in? Can you hire that expertise? Hire somebody full time. Bring somebody in from the workforce and do this. And the answer is yes. You go through the same battles you do with any hiring position. You go through the interview process. You look at the resumes. Maybe you work through a recruiter, and you try to find the right person, or persons, depending on how big that lift is. I'm biased. I like the partner route. I like what Frank was talking about, finding the right partner, simply because I think the outlay is significantly less than trying to do it yourself. Trying to come in and bring in a full-time CISO, if we're talking about cyber hygiene, and trying to bring in a director of security, a manager of security, whatever, is going to cost you a lot of money. And you're committing to somebody that you probably don't know, or maybe you're going to try to promote somebody and train them into that role. I've seen that too. It takes years to get them up to the level, as opposed to bringing in a Frank and a Heath, where you get decades of experience now, and you do it again because you're bringing in an expert, a subject matter expert. You get access to that expertise immediately. They've made the mistakes. They know what's going to happen, and you get to choose your budget. You get to work with that partner to determine what the right budget is for what you need. You get to pick how much of that box are you going to carry, and how much is your partner going to carry, and you don't have the costs associated with trying to build your own team. That's just my take and what I've seen work successfully for many years now.
Love it. Heath, closing words? By the way, you have to use
elephants were harmed in the filming of this episode.
I was going to say you have to use the word maturity. We always talk about maturity in a cybersecurity program, and I just felt like somebody needed to say it, so it should be you.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the point of the whole series, was just because you don't have maturity doesn't mean you can't, shouldn't stop you from getting started, right? You mentioned that when we did this initially,
maturity. They just may not have a lot of it.
Right. You mentioned, Rory, when you first asked this, that or talked about that we were doing this as something more to put information out there to raise awareness so people could be aware of it. I did talk about how you could go up to CIS, you could get some free tools. You could read their document and use their tool on how to do business impact analysis, understand the risk in your organization better. You can use their template for doing a risk assessment. All that stuff is there, and absolutely you can go and do all of that. And if nothing else, if that's all you can afford to do, you should do that. But you're never going to escape the fact that experience gets you a long way down the road, right? My daughter recently just got her driver's license, and she was kids today. I sound like I'm 90 now, but kids today they're in a kind of a mode of, why do I need my driver's license? I can Uber somewhere. Mom and dad will take me everywhere. Why do I even need a driver's license? And the only thing I said to her, bragging about my own parenting moment, that I think made sense was that, look, at some point in time in your next 5-6 years of your life, you're going to want your driver's license. That's not something you can wake up one day and go, I got to stop by the store today and pick up my driver's license. You need to have the experience in order to pass the test to get the certification. But you need to have the experience so that you've got experience driving down highways, going back and forth to college, doing things, because there's nothing in the world that replaces the experience and the maturity of being able to drive that car on our highway, interstate systems, and in town roads, right? As mature drivers, we all know that we watch things and see things that you wouldn't even picked up on when you were 16 years old getting your driver's license. So to equate that back, you really got to start somewhere, start doing it. You'll quickly learn that you need some experience and you need some maturity behind things helping you out going down the road. And as you continue to go down the road, you'll mature and you'll understand those things better. So while this presentation and the whole series was around raising awareness and showing people how they could do this on their own, as someone who sells these services and makes my paycheck off of people buying services for doing this, I never felt threatened that we were putting ourselves out of a job, right? You're going to need the experience from someone like Tim Marley. You're going to need experience from someone like Frank. You may not need my experience, but you're definitely going to need some experience for some very qualified, good people who are really good at this, right?
You'll be at the top of a mountain somewhere.
I'll be at the top of a mountain somewhere, exactly.
And I appreciate
with my elephant.
I appreciate you not having a QR code there on your information, right? You're like the libertarian who actually votes for the libertarian candidate, right? You're like, oh, if I'm going to tell people not to be scanning QR codes, I'm not going to give them one to scan.
I'm just going to give them the information they need. Let me move the right way. There you go. You want to get a hold of me? Go ahead. Do it.
Well, hey, I certainly appreciate you guys taking the time today to join us. And Heath, I think if anybody happens to be watching this out of order, they should absolutely go and see the cyber hygiene series that you put together. Do we know where to find that?
It's you can find that at success.forthright.com/cyber series. All episodes are up there now. You can go and click and watch all of them. We've tried to keep the meat of the content to about 15 to 25 minutes. The idea is to give you a nice little quick snippet so you can absorb this quickly and not fall asleep while I pontificate about cybersecurity and fun stuff. And elephants. Apparently I talk about elephants.
And elephants. Well, thanks for being here, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Rory. Take care, guys.
Great discussion from our panelists. I'd like to thank Tim, Frank, Heath, and Rory for their time and expertise. Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed this two-part panel discussion. And please join us for the next episode in our cyber series on August 22nd. We'll be talking about governance, risk, and compliance. You don't want to miss it. See you next time.